Hello, hello. It's Stimulus Jesus coming at you with the facts. Today we have some updates with the $1,400 stimulus check, the next stimulus bill. We have some heated arguments here that happened yesterday that I want to cover, and some kind of timeline updates that I think are important for the passing of this bill. We have some Paycheck Protection Round 2 updates, just some minor stuff there, and I also wanted to cover some frequently asked questions that I think had important answers to them. I'm going to do that at the end of this video. Also, I'd just like to apologize if I'm a little bit low energy. I'm absolutely beat right now, so I'm just going to try and get through the next 10 minutes as high energy as I possibly can, get this news and get these facts out to you fine folks. Oh, also we have some news from President Trump. Yesterday he gave a 19-minute farewell speech. I suppose I'll start with that today. So in this farewell speech, most of it was focused on positive things. He focused on his achievements as president, thanked all of his supporters, and also condemned the Capitol riots. So he highlighted some of his achievements during his presidency. Some of those that he highlighted were the Abraham Accords peace agreement. This was the treaty of peace between the United Arab Emirates and the State of Israel. He also cited that he was the first president in decades who started no wars. I thought that's kind of cool. That's something worth celebrating. And he also wished the Biden administration success in keeping America safe and prosperous. And that was about it. It was a good speech. It's worth watching if you haven't seen it yet. Now let's cover some stimulus check and stimulus package news. So there's been some unsurprising arguments about Biden's $1.9 trillion proposed stimulus relief bill. And this happened yesterday when Janet Yellen, who is set to be Biden's Treasury Secretary, appeared before the Senate Finance Committee, and they kind of grilled her with questions and comments about Biden's $1.9 trillion bill. If we remember last week, Biden's bill kind of came out as this, okay, we're going to have this bipartisan bicameral stimulus bill that everyone's going to be able to agree on. And as soon as I saw the price tag of $1.9 trillion, I was like, well, we know there's going to be a little bit of a fight here to get this thing passed. And then we looked at the details, and you know, if you watch this channel, you will not be surprised by the areas of issue that they brought up in the Senate Finance Committee meeting yesterday, because they're pretty much all what I predicted. Not to say that that's a huge accomplishment whatsoever, because they were pretty obvious and glaring things that we knew there would be disagreements on. But overall, the sentiment from Republicans who are against this bill was we are spending far too much, or it's not targeted enough. One of the biggest and major issues was state and local government funding. The Biden stimulus bill calls for $350 billion in funding for those smaller governments. And basically, it was said yesterday, why would we agree to this now if we didn't agree to this in the past? We didn't agree in the last stimulus bill. We didn't agree in negotiations before then. Why would we all of a sudden agree to this in this $1.9 trillion stimulus bill? And if we remember, in the $900 billion stimulus bill, there was state and local government funding, but then that got taken out in negotiations in exchange for also taking out McConnell's liability protections for businesses. So they're like, okay, why is this back and liability protections aren't there? You can't expect us to go for this without any issues. And then next we have the issue of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And this one I was pretty surprised to see in the stimulus bill in the first place, because it's another one of those things that we know that Democrats have been fighting for this for a long time, but then it was like, why expect this to be passed as part of a stimulus bill? We know that this is going to cause problems in negotiations. Senator Tim Scott, he argued that this would hurt small businesses while they're vulnerable from the pandemic. But Yellen kind of had a rebuttal here that says the research shows that there are minimal job losses caused by raising unemployment. Now, this made me curious, and I dug into the research here to see what exactly the research says. And what I came out with is, yes, there's no one-to-one correlation of unemployment and an increase in the minimum wage. However, just thinking about this, it wouldn't make sense for there to be an exact one-to-one correlation. So I'm just going to play devil's advocate here. So the examples they used in the study were times when the minimum wage was highest and unemployment was lowest, and they show this correlation where, well, I guess it's not correlated one-to-one. But again, to play devil's advocate here, I wouldn't expect it to be one-to-one. So as a business owner myself, I have 20 to 40 employees, depending on the season of the year. If the minimum wage was raised far above what I pay my workers right now, 20, 30% above what I pay my workers right now, I wouldn't lay off anyone the next day because that work is still there. It still needs to be completed. So my options in the short term are pretty limited. I have to keep those people hired and I have to offer this service at the same level that I've been offering it. But in the long term, I have kind of two options. I either need to raise my prices so I can keep my margins the same, or I need to find ways to effectively use less labor. And I think this is where the unemployment rate will actually be affected by a raise in minimum wage, because in the long term, the trend will go away from using labor as much as possible. That's where you have issues of automation and just tools that might replace a job because the cost factor just doesn't weigh out. And that's not something that happens the same day or even the same year that minimum wage gets increased. So that's a real tough one. I don't want to argue either side here because I see the benefit of either side. I see the benefit, obviously, of people making more money, and I empathize with the business end, especially when businesses are struggling. So hopefully just given that information, you can formulate your own opinion on the issue. The next issue they brought up was, of course, the $1,400 stimulus checks. The claim against them was by Senator Bill Cassidy, who basically said that giving these checks to people who haven't lost their jobs doesn't make sense because their income wasn't affected. And, that's one of those arguments that's tough to say because everyone has been affected in some way by the pandemic. And, just because someone kept their job doesn't mean that their spouse kept their job. There's just so many situations that we can think of where someone could be affected even though they have their job. And Yellen's rebuttal to this was basically that the unemployment boosts by themselves, the $300 per week or the proposed $400 per week, just isn't enough to help struggling families or to stimulate the economy. And we know that both of these things, studies show, help stimulate the economy. Stimulus checks, unemployment boost, and together they have the greatest net effect. So that's all I can really say on that one. So overall, just timeline-wise, I'm sticking to a March stimulus bill timeline. I can't reasonably foresee anything happening anytime in February because I think there's a lot of negotiations that need to happen. And like I mentioned in a previous video, unemployment boosts end mid-March. And we know what happens when there's deadlines. The negotiations are going to go all the way to the deadlines, and we'll probably see something happen mid-March. Now, I don't want to discourage you because I think the odds are more likely than not that we see an additional stimulus check and a stimulus bill, but I want to be as realistic and analytical as possible when we're looking at all these facts and opinions as well. Now let's quickly do some Paycheck Protection second draw news. The Paycheck Protection Round 2 opened yesterday morning and successfully funded over $5 billion in PPP loans. So if you have been thinking about getting a PPP loan, or you are an eligible 1099 worker, small business owner, sole proprietor, you should apply as soon as you possibly can because this is an extremely exciting program. And I just can't say this enough, where yes, the process is a little bit confusing, but you're looking at about an hour of work to gather paperwork and fill out an application to get potentially thousands of dollars in stimulus. The stimulus check that many are hoping for is $1,400, but if you're eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program, you can be looking up to $20,000 to $40,000 in effective stimulus. So it's a really amazing program. If you need a lender, I'll have one linked in the description that I've been working closely with. Now, a couple questions for the PPP Round 2. Someone asked, for sole proprietors with no employees, is forgiveness based on using 60% for your personal payroll? And if not, what should I spend the other 40% on? So if you're a sole proprietor, independent contractor, if you don't have employees for your service, what's considered payroll is your own pay, your own income. So you don't really have to worry about the 60% factor in that case. You really only have to worry about that if you have employees on payroll. Otherwise, it's considered 100% payroll and you are good to go. You can just pay yourself 100%, which it's really, this program is the best for people who have no employees because it's literally just paying yourself. It's It's pretty wild. Another question, what if I had employees in 2019, but due to COVID, I didn't have employees in 2020 due to layoffs? Can I still use 2019 payroll figures? And the answer to this is yes. That's another exciting thing about this program. So you can use 2019 figures to calculate your loan size, which is obviously going to be much bigger than 2020 figures in this case because you have no employees. But one thing to watch out for here, this is where that 60% rule is going to come into play for you. Because yours is going to be based on having this bunch of payroll, and your payroll isn't as high anymore, you're going to have to keep a close eye on that 60% payroll, 40% other expense in order to get full forgiveness anyways. The next question, can I use my higher 2020 Schedule C income rather than 2019? And the answer is yes. You actually get to choose 2019, 2020, whichever is higher for your net income. So something that you could potentially do here if you showed low or no income in 2019 on your Schedule C. If you haven't done your taxes yet for 2020, you have some opportunities to show some more income for 2020. So that's something to consider. Last question, do 1099 workers' wages count towards payroll under the PPP? The answer to that is no. They do not count. If you have a company with 1099 workers, all of those 1099 workers can actually apply for their own Paycheck Protection Program funding separately though. So if you're an employer with contractors, help them out and help them get the PPP loans because it's an awesome program. So that's going to do it for today. Like this video if you appreciate it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, have a profitable day.